Happy Thursday, friends. Today you finish up this incredible book. Tomorrow we have one more reading for you from the New Testament to kind of tie a ribbon on this entire reading plan. But today we get to read about the death of this figure we've known for a really long time. If you've been reading with us for a while, you first heard the story of Moses way back when we studied the book of Exodus together. And today what started with a burning bush, with a baby even placed in a river in a basket, now comes to the end at the top of this mountain. And it's a beautiful, bittersweet story filled with lots of symbolism and hope for the future. And then I just want to point out a couple of things that are really speaking to me today. So we read about the death of Moses in chapter 34, and we're specifically told one detail, that as he dies, he goes up on this high mountain, and that's where he breathes his last. Why would the author spend so much time just pointing out that detail? Well, it's because in the biblical story, especially in the Old Testament, but again in the New with Jesus, mountaintops are thin places where you go to be with God. Think about it. A lot of the really great stories of people being face to face with God or experiencing God happen on a mountaintop. Eden is said to be on a mountaintop. The garden in Genesis 1 through 3. Moses meets with God first on a burning bush that's on top of a mountain. The city of Jerusalem will be built on top of this mountain. Even Jesus, when he's crucified, is said to have done that on top of this mountain. In the biblical story, mountains are these thin places where you're almost with God. You get to be with God in this very special way. And so I think this is a way of honoring Moses, a way of saying that Moses, as he dies, is close with God. Now, I teach a Wednesday night class, and last week when we talked about the earlier stories of Moses not getting to go into the promised land, my friends were a little upset by that. Some of you are watching right now and you're like, yeah, we're still upset by that. They viewed Moses not being able to cross over with the second generation as kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, God being petty. Moses makes one mistake, so why doesn't he get to experience the blessing of the promised land? And I wondered that myself too. I've wrestled with it really ever since we wrote the email, ever since we started wrestling with it as a class together, until I got to write this section. And I read a quote by Christopher Wright, who's been one of my just inspirations through this whole plan, his commentary on Deuteronomy. And again, this is what he says about, does Moses ever get to experience the promised land? He says, perhaps one may be allowed to imagine a twinkle in the eyes of the Lord God, looking forward to that day when Moses, the servant of God, would stand at last on another mountain in the land, conversing with the Son of God about the even greater exodus that he would accomplish in Jerusalem for Israel and for the whole world. Now, of course, the story he's talking about is the Transfiguration, when Jesus goes up on the mountain with his closest circle of disciples, and they see him renewed in all of his glory, and standing on either side of him are the prophets, Elijah and Moses. And if I'm honest with you, I just broke down as I was writing about this in tears, because it was such a reminder of what this book was always supposed to be for us, of God's character, his faithfulness. Even when we can't see it, God is faithful. Moses doesn't get to experience the promised land on this side of eternity, but yet in his death, he got to see and be there and experience it. Why? Through Jesus. It is through Jesus and the work that Jesus was doing while Jesus was alive that Moses got to go back on top of another mountain next to the Son of God and experience and see the promised land in all of its glory as it had unfolded generations after he first sent the second generation into the promised land. I mean, come on. Isn't that unbelievable? And just like Moses, we have a similar story at play. We stand on the edge of the promised land, on the edge of this promise of the garden renewed, of Eden restored, heaven and earth coming together, the place where life is going to go well and there's going to be blessing and all of these wonderful things and being with God, and we're God's people and God is ours. And it's wonderful until it all goes wrong. And yet, just like for Moses, for us, it is through Jesus that we still get to be invited in, regardless of the mistakes that we make or we make as a community. That this is the gospel story all over again. And that hope, whether we can see it in Deuteronomy or not, is pointed to at the very end of this book. I mean, just look how this book ends. It says, the people of Israel wept for Moses, and then the days of weeping were ending. And then verse 10, and there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, who knew the Lord face to face. So it ends on this bittersweet note again of, gosh, Moses was great. He wasn't perfect, but he was great. We kind of need someone like him. And it isn't until 1,000 years after, generations and generations, that another baby steps onto the scene. It's not placed in a basket in a river, but placed in a stone manger, surrounded by farm animals and his earthly parents and all these other people coming to visit. And it's that baby who carries forward the story that we finish up here in Deuteronomy. It's that baby who came to be the prophet like Moses, that is actually even greater than Moses. This is what you'll read about in Hebrews tomorrow. And it's that baby who carries forward the hope, not just for all humanity, but for every individual, for all of us watching this, and unbelievably, all the way back through history, even to Moses. I wonder if Moses knew that he would get that taste of the promised land, and that one day all of us would be reunited again to experience it in its fullness at the end of the age when Jesus comes back all over again. My friends, I hope you see this is the beauty of the biblical story. And more importantly than that, this is the faithfulness of God. And it renewed my hope even more this time around, finishing this book and getting to see Moses' story through a new lens. I hope that this is a blessing for you, and I hope that you have seen God's character, God's faithfulness for you and for all of humanity on display as we finish this book. We'll be right back tomorrow for one more video, and then you've completed another reading plan. We'll see you tomorrow.